All right, there you go. Yeah, about to start. Sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashraf al-anbiya wal mursalin. Nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa 'allimna ma yanfa'una. Allahumma zidna 'ilman innaka anta 'alimul hakim. Allahumma ij'al hadhihi muhadara hujjatan lana la hujjatan 'alayna ya rabbil alamin. Amma ba'd. In continuation of the class Umdah al-Ahkam. Umdah al-Ahkam is we're covering the part of Ramadan or fasting, the rulings pertaining to fasting. So today, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to cover maybe two parts. The part that we're going to cover today, firstly, is about fasting while you are traveling. So before we get into the hadith, I want to know what everyone's understanding of fasting while traveling is. If I'm traveling, can I fast? Yes or no? Do I have to fast? Is there an instance where I should fast or I shouldn't fast? What are the rules as it pertains to fasting while traveling? And we need some evidence to support it. Travel a certain distance, for a certain amount of time. In order to fast while you're traveling? To not fast? If you're not on fast. Okay. Anyone else? Make sure you have your wudu, water. Wudu? When you get water, you fast. Yeah. If you're driving, you can pull over to the side. Also, when you break your fast, you gotta have water to drink. You said wudu. You mean water? Not wudu. Okay. I thought you said you have to have wudu. All right. That makes sense. What else? So if a person wanted to travel. So here's the thing. If a person told you I'm traveling to a particular place, they're going to ask you, do I have to fast when I'm traveling or can I break my fast? What would you tell them? And I need the answer of somebody that has like a faqih. What would you say to them? Nothing. If someone wanted to travel and they know you and they say, Sheikh Abdul Latif, I'm getting ready to travel. I don't know. Can I fast when I'm traveling? Should I not? What should I do? First of all, does anyone know any hadith or ayat, anything from the deen that supports breaking your fast while you're traveling or fasting while you're traveling? Anyone? Right. Has anyone ever traveled in the month of Ramadan? Yes, y'all did. Somebody did. Nobody traveled in the month of Ramadan?
What's the distance on considered
traveling? So for today's class, we're going to use whatever distance you consider traveling.
For instance.
No. I understand what I'm saying. For today's class, we're going to use whatever distance you and the people that you're close to consider to be traveling. Did that make sense? All right. So then, I'm listening. Have you traveled in Ramadan?
No.
Never. So we have all these Muslims here, and no Muslim here has ever traveled in the month of Ramadan.
I be here, but I don't know if that's considered travel.
Well, where'd you go?
I'm in and out of Baltimore and Delaware.
Do you consider that traveling?
I mean,
Baltimore, maybe. Did you consider it traveling?
Not really, because I'm in and out, back and forth all the time.
Okay.
Is traveling, would it constitute like you having to pack your bag and things of this nature? Like,
I'm asking, did anyone travel? That's all. This is a question because we're trying to get to a point. So let's say pack your bags. I mean, it's not strange that people didn't travel on Ramadan. It's not strange. A lot of people A lot of people just like, in Ramadan, most people want to buckle down and focus, right? I get it. I'm just saying it's enough people here. Maybe one person might travel in Ramadan. Nobody? Pa-
That's how I did when I traveled. When I went to Washington, boom.
Okay.
It was permissible for the traveling person.
I'm sorry?
Said it was permissible for the traveling person, not to fast.
Yes, it is. But my question is, has anyone traveled while they were fasting before? No one. So no one here traveled while they were fasting.
I don't even remember that time we went up to New York.
Sheikh, you ever travel while you were fasting? Never. Nobody. Okay. So let's say you know someone that wanted to travel. Let's say you have a son, daughter, whoever, and you know they want to travel in Ramadan. And they're going to ask you, can I fast? Should I fast? What would you tell them? You'll tell them what? You'll tell them it's permissible to fast? It's permissible to break your fast. Okay. All right. So the hadith that we're going to cover today is a series of hadith, and it talks about the fiqh of traveling while you're fasting, the rulings pertaining to it. And we're going to go through each hadith. When you hear the first hadith, you're going to say, You hear the second hadith, you may hear something different. The third, it may be something different. The fourth, it may be something different. And then we're going to bring them all together and look at how we're supposed to look at them. Okay? But the first hadith is called the chapter Bab as-Sawm fi Safar wa Ghayri. The chapter is called fasting and traveling and other than that, right? It says, An Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha. So this hadith was reported by an Aisha, who was the wife of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, أن حمزة ابن عمر الأسلمي رضي الله تعالى عنه قال للنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So Hamza, he said to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, Asumu fi safar. So the first thing he said was, can I fast while I'm traveling? Right? Can I fast while I'm traveling? So if a person asks the Prophet ﷺ if they could fast while traveling, what comes to mind? That maybe it wasn't brought up yet. Maybe none of the companions asked that question yet. Maybe he didn't know of anyone traveling and fasting at the same time. And then what it says after that is وَكَانَ كَثِيرُ الصِّيَامِ وَكَانَ كَثِيرَ الصِّيَامِ. And this person, Hamza, he used to fast all the time. So think about it. Let's say you're a person that fasts all the time, maybe every other day. And he wants to know, Asumu fi safar, can I fast while I'm traveling? Now understand that the Prophet ﷺ, he knows the people that are what? Asking the questions. It's not like it's a random question from someone he doesn't know. These are his companions. They asked him, is it okay for me to fast while I'm traveling? And then they added in the hadith, وَكَانَ كَثِيرَ الصِّيَامِ, and this person fasts frequently. So the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "In shitta fasum wa in shitta fa'aftir." So the Prophet ﷺ said to him, if you want to, you can fast, and if you want to, you can break your fast. Is that clear? If you want to, you can fast, and if you want to, you can break your fast. So what do we understand from that? You have an option. Just like that, you have an option. The option is what? You can fast if you're traveling, or you don't have to fast when you're traveling. Any questions about that? Real quick, let's go back to the person. This person, he fasts all the time. He's known to fast. So the Prophet ﷺ said about him, if you want to fast, you can, and if you don't want to fast, you don't have to. Yes.
No, it's all right, because I don't think it's pertaining to that. It's
Go ahead.
about the prayer when traveling. So,
Short and combining.
yeah.
What about
While fasting, if you want to fast,
Shuf.
you're still short the
a person? So fasting and shortening the salat or extending salat, they're two different things, right? So you're saying if you break your fast, can you still shorten your prayer? All right. The ulama of Islam, when it comes to shortening the salat, if you're traveling, this is very important. As Muslims, if you're traveling and you know that you're traveling and you're going to be disobeying Allah, it's called safru ma'asiyah. If you know what you're doing, you know if you're moving out of pocket or not, right? Everyone knows that. If you're traveling and you know that you're going to be disobeying Allah when you travel, it's not permissible for you to shorten your salah. Is that clear? The scholars of Islam, they say that because shortening the salat is a ruqsa. It's a concession. It's a benefit that Allah gave to those Muslims that are obeying Allah while they're traveling. But if a person is traveling and you know you're going to travel and do some disobedience of Allah, it is not permissible for you to shorten your salah. It is not permissible for you to shorten your salah. Right. Any questions about this hadith? Right. So now we're going to move to the next one. عن أنس ابن مالك رضي الله تعالى عنه قال كنا نسافر مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فلم يعب الصائم على المفطر ولا المفطر على الصائم. And this hadith from Anas ibn Malik, he said we traveled with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. The term kana or kunna, I mean we used to, or we were traveling with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. فلم يعب الصائم على المفطر على المفطر. Right? So they were traveling with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Let's say, for example, it was a group of us, 5 brothers. We all traveled. It's Ramadan. A group from among us fasted, and a group from among us did not fast. He said in this hadith, we didn't find the ones that were fasting looking down on the ones that didn't fast. And the ones that didn't fast did not look down on the ones that were fasting. Does that make sense? Right. So they said that during that time, generally speaking, if a person was fasting and somebody, let's say, for example, a group of us traveled. You're fasting, I'm not fasting. There's a high likelihood of somebody looking at the brother like that, man, why you not fasting? You out of pocket. Does that sound about right? It's Ramadan. We all traveling, everybody fasting but you. Come on, man. Right? So what they're saying is the companions are saying that none of them looked down on each other if the other one fasted and the other one did not. All right, so what do we understand from that? The first part, if we look at the first hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, if a person wanted to fast when he was traveling, he can. And if he didn't want to fast when he was traveling, he didn't have to. Okay, that's the first hadith. The second hadith tells us that if you decided to fast, then it's not from the sunnah for you to look down on somebody that does, or vice versa. Does that make sense? It's not from our deen to look down on someone if we're all traveling and I choose not to fast and you do. You don't make me feel some type of way about it, and I don't make you feel some type of way about it. All right? This is important. Right? Right. Those are the first 2 hadith. The third hadith. عن أبي درداء رضي الله تعالى عنه قال خرجنا مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في شهر رمضان في حر شديد. So now Abi Darda, he said that we traveled with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam in Ramadan. And now he's explaining the environment during that time. He said في حر شديد, and it was extremely hot. حتى إن كان أحدنا لا يدعو يده على رأسه من شدة حر. He said it was so hot that one of us or some of us will put our hands on our heads. وَمَا فِينَا صَائِمٌ إِلَّا رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ وَعَبْدُ اللَّهِ ibn Rawah. And he said, none of us were fasting except for the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and Abdullah ibn Rawah. So it was so hot. So this means, what's the benefit we can get from this hadith right here? Extreme heat, maybe you shouldn't fast. Excellent. What else?
Can you say it again?
The hadith? Right. It said we left with the Prophet, we traveled with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the month of Ramadan in extreme heat, to the point that some of us were placing our hands on our heads due to the heat. And none of us were fasting except for the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and Abdullah ibn Rawah. What benefit can we get from this hadith? There's no wrong answer. I'm not going to say, hey, that's wrong. You can't, just what benefit can we pull from the hadith? Say again. How strong the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was. Yes, like he was not like everyone else. Right? Yes.
Alongside the Prophet, they're not fasting during the month of Ramadan.
So that's another benefit. They were with the Prophet. Now, mind you, one thing we know about Muslims, if we know that the messenger, imagine if we lived around the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and it's Ramadan, and he's traveling, and you see the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam fasting, everyone else is probably going to do what? Fast. So if we find that all of the companions broke their fast, what does that tell you about the conditions? Had to be hot. The conditions had to be really bad. So that the only people that were fasting were the Prophet ﷺ and Abdullah ibn Rawah. Everyone else broke their fast. That's how strong, that's how bad the condition was. So then, it shows the strength of the Prophet ﷺ. It also shows the strength of Abdullah ibn Rawah. Right. What else? What other benefit can we get from this hadith? It also shows that it's optional. The same thing we got in the other two hadith. Right? Right. Now we're going to move on to the next hadith. عن جابر بن عبد الله رضي الله تعالى عنه قال كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في سفر فرأى زحاما ورجلا قد ذلل عليه فقال ما هذا؟ قالوا صائم. قال ليس من البر الصيام في السفر. وفي لفظ لمسلم عليكم برخصة الله التي رخص لكم. In this hadith, عن جابر بن عبد الله, he said the Prophet ﷺ was traveling and he saw a group of people crowding around one of the companions trying to give him some shade. Perhaps he may have passed out. They were trying to give him shade. So the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ma hadha?" What's going on with him? What happened to him? Qalu sa'imun. Oh, he was fasting. So this shows that he was fasting, and the fasting got to him that he passed out. Maybe his situation was bad. So the Prophet ﷺ said, "Laysa min al-birri as-siyamu fi as-safar." The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, it's not from piety to fast when you are traveling. It's not from righteousness and piety to fast while you are traveling. And then another narration that we can find in Sahih Muslim, he says, it is upon you to take the concessions that Allah has given you. We should take the concessions that Allah has given us. So then, what do we get from this hadith right here? The other hadith has said that if a person can fast, or he doesn't have to fast while he's traveling. Right? We also saw another hadith where it said that one companion didn't look down on the other if one was fasting and one wasn't. We have another hadith. The weather was so hot that everyone broke their fast except for the Prophet ﷺ and Abdullah ibn Rawah. And then we have this hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, there's no piety in fasting while you're traveling. How do we understand that? Does it sound like a contradiction? Does it? Yes or no? Don't be afraid. We're learning. Does it?
He's fasting while traveling, but no one else is.
Right. But in this case here, it said we don't know. This is a different hadith. In this hadith right here, he said he saw a crowd of people gathering around someone. Dhulila alayh. Maybe they were trying to give him shade. Perhaps he passed out. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Man hadha, what's going on with him? They said, oh, he was fasting. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, it's not from piety to fast while you are traveling. How do we understand that?
You're not supposed to harm yourself if you're fasting and you can't because of extreme heat or some type of other conditions.
You're not supposed to harm yourself.
Because I mean, if extreme conditions and you're still trying to fast, that could be harming yourself.
Okay. What is that? Does everyone else understand that? What else? What do you guys understand from that hadith?
Pressure on you traveling, trying to fast.
So say that again.
You don't want to put the pressure on the travelers.
He done. So for the Prophet ﷺ to say there's no righteousness, there's no piety in fasting while you are traveling. And then all the other hadith said you have an option to fast if you're traveling or you don't have to fast. And then we have this hadith. So do they go against each other? Huh? Do they go against each other? No. So how do we make sense of it? Anyone else? This is why we're going to go through the next hadith and then we're going to put them all together, right? The next hadith. عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله تعالى عنه قال كنا مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في سفر. He said we were with the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام while we were traveling. فمنا صائم ومنا المفطر. He said while we were traveling with the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, some of us were fasting and some of us were not fasting. قال فنزلنا منزلا في يوم حار. He said we reached a place that was very, very hot. We reached a place that was very hot. وأكثرنا ظلا صاحب كساء. Most of us were looking for shade. We're looking for something to cover ourselves from the heat. ومنا من يتقي الشمس بيده. And some of us, we were using our hand to block the sun. قال فسقط الصوام. And then all of the ones that were fasting, they sat down and relaxed. وقام المفطرون. And the ones that were not fasting, they stood up. فضربوا أبنية. They stood up and they started to build something like a tent or something. فسقوا الركاب. And they gave the people something to drink where the animals thirst, or gave them something to drink. فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. So the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, ذهب المفطرون اليوم بالأجر. So the Prophet alayhi salatu, he said that all of the ones who were not fasting today, they got the reward. Whereas the ones that were fasting, they did not get that reward. Now, what does that mean? If you're fasting, you don't get the reward?
No, you said they don't get that.
That reward. What reward are they talking about? Is the hadith clear? Again, there were a group that were fasting, there were a group that were not fasting, right? When they reached a particular place, it was very hot. So the ones that were fasting, they sat down and relaxed. The ones that were not fasting, they built stuff for everyone, gave drink to everyone, what have you. The Prophet ﷺ said the ones that were not fasting, they got the reward that day. Because they provided food, right? And drink, etc., right? So here's the thing. When a person is fasting, right? Who benefits from a person fasting? Am I benefiting from your fast? Is he benefiting from your fast? Are you benefiting from his fast? No, then. So when a person fasts, that fast benefits who? that individual. Islam is predicated on benefiting the majority. So because of this, in this particular hadith, Nabi alayhi salatu salam, now mind you, they're all traveling, so you have the option to break your fast. So while the ones that broke their fast, that weren't fasting, they built stuff, they put everything together and made it okay for the ones that were fasting and everyone else. Because they did that, they benefited themselves and they benefited everyone else. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ, he said the ones that were not fasting on that day at that time got the reward. Does that mean that the one that was fasting didn't get a reward? No. They get the reward for fasting, right? But the other ones, they got the reward for benefiting themselves and everyone else around them, right? And it would have been permissible for them to break their fast. So then, we're going to look at all the ahadith. We're going to look at all of them together, right? When the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that it's okay to fast if you want to, or don't fast if you don't want to, if a person is traveling, the understanding of that is that if it's easy for you, if there's no difficulty, if this is something that you usually do, because if you recall the first hadith, it said the man kana kathiru siyam, that the man fasted often. He fasted all the time. So because of that, the Prophet ﷺ said, if you want to fast, you can. If you don't want to fast, you don't have to. The second hadith, yes. Walaikum salam.
When I came in off my students, I heard you mention the hadith about there's no piety in he who fasts who is traveling. Then when I came back, and he was talking about how, pursuing the easy route, doing that which is easy for the traveler and he who is fasting. And when I heard you talk about there's no piety for he who is traveling that fasts, I was thinking that in that time, it's the desert, water was rare, camel, horses, desert. It's a big difference in traveling, let's say it's a big difference in traveling from city to city then in that condition, in that sun, and that as rare as water is, and on a camel and fasting in 110 degrees. It's a bit different if I had to go from here to, let's say, New Jersey. With a camel, that might take 2 days. I'd take maybe 2 hours back. It may be different. We may have to try to understand how it is that we apply the sunnah of that time today. I was still.
That makes sense. Alhamdulillah. That's a good point.
But I don't want to disagree with the scholars or any master or chief of hadith. That's not where I'm not offering them disagree.
No, I get it. I don't understand that. That's not the impression that you gave off.
Good.
Alhamdulillah. Right? Yeah, that wasn't the impression. The thing is, we have a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ mentioned you can fast if you want to fast, if you're traveling, or you don't have to, right? Then we have another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he said that there's no piety in fasting while you're traveling. So a person might ask, why did the Prophet ﷺ say there's no piety while you're fasting if you're traveling? And then why did he say you can fast if you're traveling or you don't have to? What is apparent to the person that's just looking at it, it would appear as if there's some type of contradiction, right? It would appear that way. But the reality is that when the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that there's no righteousness or piety when you're traveling while fasting, was understood from that hadith is that if your fast is become difficult for you to the point where you're harming yourself and you're traveling, in this case, there is no piety in doing that. There's no righteousness in doing that. Because in Islam, it's haram for you to harm yourself. to the point, if you notice in this hadith, the man passed out, they were all crowded around. If your fasting causes all of us to pay attention to you and give you extra attention and you're traveling, that's not a good position to be in. For him to understand, that's how the hadith is understood. And in the other hadith, where he said that the ones that are that did not fast, they left with the reward. The understanding of that is likewise they were traveling and work needed to be done. And let's say we have 10 brothers and we got to build something. And half of the brothers are sitting down relaxing, and the other half, they didn't fast. So and we're all traveling, and the other group of brothers didn't fast. So they broke their fast or what have you, and they're building, they're feeding, they're aiding the people. In this regard, the Prophet ﷺ said, the ones that did not fast, they left with the reward that day. Why? Because some of the ulama mentioned that, first of all, fasting at that time wasn't obligatory because they were traveling. Helping the Muslims during that time could have been considered to be obligatory to aid the ones who needed help. So in this case, you have to apply wisdom, masalih and mafasid. You have to weigh the pros and the cons. So in this case, it may have been more beneficial to help your brothers, break your fast, help your brothers, as opposed to sitting there fasting in that regard. Because of that, the Prophet ﷺ said the people that broke their fast, or the people that were eating, they were the ones that got the reward on that day. Yes.
Will those who did not fast and serve the community, you have to make that day up.
Shuf. Anytime we have an obligatory fast and you're traveling, you have to make that day up. Anytime you're traveling and you break your fast and it's an obligatory fast, you must make that day up. The only time a person doesn't have to make a day up is if they have a type of illness that they will not be cured from, that they do not believe that they will be cured from. Outside of that, anytime we're traveling and we break our fast, as Allah says, you have to make those days up, fi ayamin ukhar, and other days outside of that. Any questions about that? Any questions about those hadith? I was thinking about going into the next part. What time is suhoor? I mean iftar. I said suhoor. 2 minutes? No, we don't got enough time.
Since you stop right there, quick question: does the purpose of the draft ever come into play?
So in the first few hadith, the ulama mentioned that is يجوز جواز السفر في Ramadan. They just showed that it's permissible to travel in the month of Ramadan. The only time the reason why you're traveling comes up is if it's a safar ma'asiyah, if you're traveling, commit some sin, or if you're not traveling, commit a sin. So a person will say, what does that mean? As we mentioned earlier, if you are traveling and you know that you're going to be committing a sin, you are not allowed to shorten your salat. You cannot shorten your salat. For example, if you're traveling a certain distance, you say, I'm going to be out of town for 3 days, 2 days, and you know you're going to do something haram, and that's the purpose of your travel, it is not permissible for you to shorten your salat. It is not permissible for you to shorten your salat. Yes. That, Allahu Alam. I never heard any of the early man mention that. If you're fasting a wajib fast, that's like saying, listen, if a person's traveling to commit some disobedience of Allah, does that mean he's not Muslim anymore? Huh? No, he's still Muslim. The salat is still obligatory. But now, if you are traveling in obedience of Allah, you have a concession to combine the salat. But since you're traveling with the intent to disobey Allah, then you don't get that concession. You have to pray all of your salawat in its prescribed times. As for fasting, likewise, fasting is obligatory. You don't have the right, you still have to fast regardless. Whether you are fasting, you're saying if you're traveling and have an obligatory fast, can you break your fast for traveling if you're traveling and to disobey Allah? Is that what you're asking?
even though
Do you have the right to break your fast?
you still have to fast, because you
That's like saying,
you say, "Oh, I know I'm sinning. I'm about to go to this, do that. I'm not going to break my."
if you book a trip to Miami, it's haram to go to Miami?
I'm just saying, you know what you about to go do in Miami.
Oh.
I'll book a trip during Ramadan to Miami.
Why book a trip during Ramadan to Miami? Maybe you got business in Miami. So you're saying if you're going to Miami to commit sins?
You going to Miami just to vacation. That shouldn't be.
I mean, but is it a sin though?
No, I'm saying like you should be like, oh, all right.
No, hear me out. Hear me out. It's permissible to travel in Ramadan. No one put no restrictions. You can't go here. However, if you're traveling to commit a sin, that's different with regards to the salat. As it relates to fasting, whether you fast or don't fast, you still have to make the day up if you miss it. Right? Is it time to tell you? Is it possible I can get a date or something? Inshallah. I'm just saying. No, we're gonna wait for the mu'adhin to call the adhan. Inshallah. Is it time? All right, inshallah. I mean, Bismillah. So when you break your fast, you should wait for the imam or the mu'adhin to call the adhan before you break your fast. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying, in case anybody thought about it. Jazakallah khair. Bismillah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah.